Hey guys, thanks for joining me on your day off, I guess. Sorry to have to record a lecture, but I'll try and make it as brief and to the point as possible, both for the sake of your time and also because I have a 45-minute limit on my record time now. So this is chapter 24, which in your slide presentations is divided into two parts. Before I go into the first part, I'd like to sort of review some of the artists who are going to be on your first test, like Jacques-Louis David, Ezra Delacroix, Claude Monet, Auguste Renoir, Georges Seurat, André de Toulouse-Lautrec, Henri Matisse, Georges Braque, and Marcel Duchamp. And if they all sound like they have something in common, that's because they are all French. Because before World War II, the center of the art world was in Paris. So even if you weren't French, people like Mary Cassatt, Vincent van Gogh, Pablo Picasso, Salvador Dali, Frida Kahlo, they all found their footing in Paris, not in their home countries. But then World War II happened, and the center of the art world shifts from Paris to New York. Write that down. So New York City, after World War II, that's where the art scene is bumping. And that is where we pick up here. And that's why our first group of artists are called the New York School. Not because it's a literal school. It just embodies the type of art that was prevalent in the United States after World War II. These are the people who are setting the trends in the art world. The first style that you need to know, the style is abstract expressionism. And the most obvious person who embodies that technique is my boy, Jackson Pollock, whose work of art you see here, Autumn Rhythm. All right, so style, of course, is about technique, influence, and subject. Subject, as you might imagine, doesn't really exist here. Abstract expressionism means works of art where the abstractometer is basically pumped all the way up. This work of art is, to quote a vocab term, non-representational. Abstract expressionist technique, they tend to work on a very large scale. As you can see, this piece is 17 feet wide. This is what it looks like in person. It's an enormous painting. And in class, sometimes there's a colorful discussion about this type of art, whether you like it, whether you don't. And I can definitely appreciate people who just aren't very excited by this type of art, just don't find it all that engaging or interesting. I can sympathize with that. But even if you don't think that it's really all that great, it did really set the art world on fire. This was just a totally new type of art and really embodied that sort of post-war spirit of like, it's a new world and our art should reflect it. If you look at the technique, well, we actually have recordings of Jackson Pollock at work. And you can see that he's really working in a very untraditional way. He's working on the floor. You can see that he is using a paintbrush, but is not touching the surface of the canvas. The canvas itself is not stretched and primed and pulled taut, but just rolled out on the ground. And furthermore, you can see that while his paint could still be classified as oil paints, they're not your traditional artist oils, thick and in a tube, but very loose and fluid. And he's kind of improvising, just sort of splashing his paint around as he goes. It's a very fun method, honestly. And if you're looking at this and you're thinking to yourself, oh, geez, I could do that, I want to encourage you to maybe give it a try. Because actually one of the homework options involves creating a drip painting in the style of Jackson Pollock. It's an assignment that I first gave to a group of third graders at an arts and crafts camp, and I translated it into a Blackboard project as well. And you can see that some of these students really had a lot of fun with it. It really helps to put on music, sort of improvise and dance with your paint. I recommend using a very thin, sort of cheap paint, something that splatters easily. But it's a really interesting project, and I think that the end results are honestly pretty interesting. I'm a big fan of Jackson Pollock, but again, if not for you, I can understand that. This is a piece by Willem de Kooning, and in class I usually ask, how is this guy different from Jackson Pollock? He's similar in that he's considered abstract expressionist, but the difference is perhaps you can see a semblance of a subject matter. The title is Woman and Bicycle. And typically whenever I show that, people are straining to try and find the bicycle. On the abstractometer, this is pretty high up again. But the idea again is that it's not a controlled, blended type of paint, but rather very thick, very assertive, very improvised, very abstract, and, again, to use a vocab term, very painterly. This is Willem de Kooning's other sorts of works. You can see some of him really pushing that abstractometer all the way up. Some people like that. You can tell the subject a bit more, but other people don't find his art all that exciting. There was an artist that I thought was kind of interesting who kind of took the opposite approach. Rather than taking a legible subject matter and making it illegible, he went the other way around, sort of turning the abstractometer dial down. And I thought that was kind of creative, and it kind of helps me maybe understand de Kooning's art a little bit better. I thought it was just kind of a clever take on that. Our third member of the New York school is not abstract expressionism, but vocab, color field art. This is one of those cases where the vocab term is kind of self-explanatory. A color field painting is a work of art in which large fields of color are the subject. So once again, this work of art is non-representational. It's nothing but color. But you can see how this is different from Jackson Pollock's. It's not that aggressive, improvised quality of paint, but just very large areas of color. Mark Rothko, as you can see, wanted his art to evoke emotional responses, joy, sadness, calmness. Whether or not he succeeded is kind of a matter of opinion. I find that Mark Rothko's art is usually very appealing. This is a photograph of a Mark Rothko room at the High Museum. I think this one is at the Phillips Gallery in D.C. Yeah, people usually sit and sort of meditate and look at these large paintings full of color. Yeah, these are not the only three post-World War II artists, but these are the three most visible advocates of the New York school. These two considered abstract expressionists, and Mark Rothko a color field artist, but all part of that movement in post-World War II New York City, getting away from subject matter and just having pure color and pure paint. And in case you look at it and you're not all that excited, well, you're not the only one. Robert Rauschenberg didn't really care for this approach too much. He's often called a combine artist. To be frank, this is one of those pieces where in the context of your textbook or on your test, you just need to know the artist name and the title. This is Monogram by Robert Rauschenberg. This is a key example of a mixed media work of art, the central medium being, well, a stuffed goat with a tire around its middle. In case you're looking at it and you're wondering, what the heck does this mean? It doesn't really mean anything. It's art that's supposed to be just pure nonsense, and in a way kind of a response to the abstract expressionists. The abstract expressionists are very abstract, and this guy is very literal. Abstract expressionists felt like their works of art are deeply meaningful. Robert Rauschenberg doesn't really have an interpretation to go along with his art. It's supposed to be just sort of appealing to the eye and just kind of silly and nonsensical. Normally I take some time to sort of point out the composition, how the repeating shapes of squares and semicircles and rippling effects are repeated. But in the interest of time, I'll just be frank, this is one where you just need to know the artist. As is this one, Jasper Johns. He's also part of that anti abstract expressionist movement, a work of art that almost seems like a Mark Rothko, large areas of color and painterly application, the difference being that this work of art is extremely literal. It's called Target with Four Faces. And I'm laughing a bit because my cat is pawing at the door. I'm going to let him in. What the heck? Hey, Toulouse. Come on in here, punk. Interrupting my presentation. Well, he's getting an education too. Anyway, just to be totally frank, this is a piece where I just like to point out the sort of, again, opposite of abstract expressionism. It's totally literal, not abstract at all. It's a target and has four faces. One of the things, though, I like to point out is the type of paint that he used, encaustic. And as a matter of fact, this is the only work of art in the entire textbook that uses encaustic as the medium. The only one we've seen since chapter 7. I just thought that was kind of a nice little callback. All right, so no style for this one. But you do need to know the style for this. Okay, this is pop art. All right. So first, let's take a look at what we see. It looks like we've got an interior scene here, a sort of a living room scene with two characters sitting on couches in this sort of strange interior. As you can see, the medium is collage. The thing about pop art is the subjects of pop art tend to be derived from, as you might expect, pop culture. Advertisements in this case, cut out pictures from magazines and newspapers. Let's see, this work of art, it's sort of like, the thing about pop art, it's almost like taking traditional subjects and finding 1950s equivalents to it. Instead of like Michelangelo's David, it's a bodybuilder. Instead of like some Venus goddess of love, it's a lady from a Playboy magazine. Oh my goodness, my cat is all up in my business. Hi, kitty. I'll just be totally honest. This is one where you just need to know the style. Richard Hamilton is an English artist who pioneered the pop art movement. Pop culture, celebrities, comics, television. And in terms of technique, it's all about mass production. Nothing made by hand, nothing painted by hand. Everything here in this case cut out of a magazine. Okay, excuse me for one moment. I need to pause. Sorry about that. My cat was getting kind of noisy. Yes, so we were looking at pop art. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Where was I? Yep, so yeah, the whole idea with pop art is that in today's society, nothing is really made by hand anymore. Everything kind of comes from a factory. Everything is mass produced. We don't really hunt our food, we buy it. We don't make our furniture, we purchase it. When something breaks, we don't fix it, we replace it. Everything is about consumerism, cheaply made goods, mass produced, and pop art is supposed to speak to that kind of attitude. This work of art has one of my favorite titles in all of art history. Just what is it that makes today's homes so different, so appealing? And in terms of, shut up, Grix, what's on the test? You do need to know that this is an example of pop art, and it should be easy for you to remember because if we take a look right in the middle of the piece, you can see that this character here is holding a Tootsie Pop. So I expect everyone to get this one right on the test. All right, you've probably heard of this one before. This is Andy Warhol. His style is also pop art. He was the most visible person who used this style. And the subject of his work of art is clearly the actress Marilyn Monroe. The title of the piece is Marilyn Diptych. And it really speaks to that idea of pop art as sort of finding modern day equivalents to Renaissance ideas. Instead of being an oil painting, this is a silk screen. This was all printed in that very cheap screen printing method, which you might remember from chapter 8. It's not a unique one-of-a-kind work of art, but a mass-produced image. The title is diptych. A diptych is usually a religious work of art, but in this case, the subject of the work of art isn't the Virgin Mary or some sort of goddess. It's Marilyn Monroe, a celebrity, an actress, sort of elevated to the status of a personal religious icon. And actually the idea of almost like a martyred saint being worshipped here. If you look at the date, this was done in 1962, just a few months after Marilyn Monroe's death. Whenever it comes to interpreting the work of art, people often interpret it as kind of like elevating the celebrity to goddess status. People look at it as kind of like the Marilyn Monroe that we all know and love is really just a facade, something cheap and plastic, something made in a factory. You know, that wasn't her real name. That wasn't her real hair color. She was a product. She was like a can of Coke or a can of Campbell's soup, just this mass-produced consumer object for us to consume. It's a pretty smart commentary on celebrity worship, but in terms of how this conforms to pop art, mass-produced technique, appropriating images from pop culture, celebrities, advertisements. And in this case, comic books. Roy Lichtenstein has a very iconic style and very easy to identify. You just take a comic book panel and you blow it up to enormous sizes. This work of art, as you can see, is 5'7" by 5'6". It's a huge work of art. And the entire subject is this strange blue-haired girl with a little speech bubble coming out of her head. Again, it's kind of like finding contemporary equivalents to fine art methods. We've seen lots of paintings of beautiful women, but in this case, instead of like the Mona Lisa, it's some girl from a cheap pulp comic book from the 60s. As a matter of fact, I found this kind of interesting. People have gone to the effort to track down Roy Lichtenstein's original images. And in this case, the work of art comes from a comic book series called Secret Hearts, which are these sort of campy, pulpy love comics from the 60s, these kind of comics for girls. And you can see that he's changed the original panel just slightly, made it more cartoony, more flat, and also changed the speech bubble of the girl here. Simplified the shapes of the waves curling around her head. And you might find it interesting that this comic book, these comics aren't very valuable. You know, they're not like Superman or Spider-Man or anything that comic connoisseurs are interested in, but art connoisseurs are, because Secret Hearts number 83 was actually the source for two Roy Lichtenstein paintings, Drowning Girl, and this one here, Hopeless. And as a matter of fact, this comic, if you go to a comic book store, like, you know, one of those dusty old numbers where you're just digging through these old tomes, you could probably find a box of it for like $0.25 each. And let me tell you, if you have the patience to go digging for Secret Hearts number 83, buy it. Because, yeah, this thing is just a cheap, no good comic book, but you could turn around and sell it on eBay for around $400 or $500. Yeah, again, they're highly sought after, not by comics collectors, but by art collectors. I just thought you might find that interesting. I've always really enjoyed Roy Lichtenstein's style. Again, it's sort of cheap pop culture. The paint is kind of cheap, synthetic paint. He does a lot of silk screening, like those little dots there. And it's just kind of interesting to see a very campy comic book panel blown up to enormous size. It's a style that's very iconic, and I see it sometimes in today's society, girls doing these makeup techniques, and also the Spider-Verse movie did a lot of sort of nods to Roy Lichtenstein and that comic book style with the little dots everywhere. Kind of like a contemporary take on pointillism in a way. All right, so looks like I'm 20 minutes in. looking good. Let's take a look at chapter 24, part 2. All right. So, in case you're getting a little bit frustrated with the art world and how silly it's become, buckle your seatbelts. All right, now we're getting into the 60s and the 70s. This first guy, don't worry about writing him down, but I love to show this work of art and gauge students' responses. This is 1 and 3 Chairs by Joseph Beuys. And is this art? Not really. It's a chair, a photograph of a chair, and then the definition of the word chair. Clearly, visually, this work of art is not very interesting, but conceptually, it's supposed to be interesting. Get you to start musing on what does it mean to be chair. And yeah, in case you're like, I don't get it, this is kind of silly. Well, welcome to the late 60s. If you were to write your analysis paper on a work of conceptual art, there is nothing visual about it. It's all ideas. Art sometimes is all about communicating an idea. Well, what if we remove the art and focus just on the idea? Could that be art too? Or what if we did the opposite? All right, this one will be on your test. This is an example of an art movement called Minimalism. So Donald Judd, and the title of the piece is Untitled. It doesn't have a title. It's not meant to have a title. What we're looking at here are these sort of almost machine-made looking objects. 10 little plexiglass panels stacked from the floor to the ceiling, and it doesn't have a title. Minimalism is the idea that can a work of art just be visually interesting and that's it? Can a work of art not have a meaning and still be interesting? Some people might say yes, absolutely. And that's the idea here. It's different from traditional paintings like this work of art here. It's minimalist. It's called blue, green, yellow, orange, red. It's 5 panels that are nothing but color. In a way, they're sort of similar to the color field paintings of Mark Rothko, but the difference is with Mark Rothko, he wants to evoke emotional responses. He wants to communicate mood through his paintings, and his technique is very brushy and painterly. Whereas Ellsworth Kelly, it looks almost machine-made. Minimalist works of art almost look like no artist made them. This isn't about the artist expressing themselves. This is about making a work of art that's purely visual, and that's it. No meaning, no inner interpretation, no subject, just color, just shape. Here's some other works of minimalism. They actually have a large piece at the High Museum that I went and saw a few years ago. I also really like this sort of cathedral that he designed. Nothing but colors and shapes. No meaning, no inner truths, just works of art that are visual, but not conceptual. Some people are a big fan of minimalism. They kind of like this idea. It's pretty to look at, and maybe that's all that matters. And this is one of those aesthetics that's definitely taken off in the art world. Minimalism is works of art that are very simple, very pared down, very geometric and simple. And it also translates into, well, interior design or product design. The design of iPhones is very minimalist, like no buttons, no interface, just very simple and pared down. The White Album by the Beatles is a minimalist album cover. If you want a minimalist wedding dress, it doesn't have a lot of fuss and feathers, just simple, clean lines and clean shapes. Some people really like this aesthetic. Less is more, they say. All right, but this is an example of a style, an ism, minimalism. No meaning, just visuals. All right, but what if we take the minimalist ideas of simple visuals and no inner message, but combine it with interesting concepts? Okay, this is a case where you just need to know the artist's name. Cristo and Jean-Claude. They are a husband and wife couple. Well, I should say were. They have both unfortunately passed away. And they collaborate on these site-specific installations. You might remember the term site-specific. This is running fence. This is a large fabric curtain that stretches over the hills. Why I say this work of art is conceptually interesting as well as visually interesting, take a look down here at the dimensions. This is the largest work of art we've seen yet in our textbook. 18 feet tall, 24 miles long. This fabric fence stretched for 24 miles through California. And now some questions are probably running through your head. How? How did they get this fabric? How did they get the permission to do this? And why? What does it mean? Is this making some sort of comment on border walls and shutting out an illegal immigration? No, it's not meant to really have any sort of political message. It's just supposed to be kind of magical. This fence that sort of showed up in the middle of nowhere. If you take a look at the dates, you'll notice that this is a 4-year span. Now, it's not that this piece was up for 4 years, but it took 4 years of planning and preparation and permits and getting the materials. And this work of art was only up for 14 days, and it was dismantled. Art in the 60s is all about sort of removing the ideas of what art is, that it needs to be meaningful, that it needs to be beautiful, or that it needs to be something that you see in a museum. These guys create works of art that are open to anybody. They're not commodities. They're nothing that you can purchase. They're just temporary site-specific installations, enormous and huge, and that are only up for a very limited amount of time, just for a few weeks usually, and then taken down. And another thing that Christo and Jean-Claude very much insisted on is that their art is not to be purchased or commodified. For instance, the famous gates. 15 years ago in New York City, they took years and years of time to set up these orange gateways. And if you want to purchase one and take it home with you, well, tough rocks. It's not meant to be something that only the super rich can enjoy. This is for everyone to enjoy. And I find that his art, some people find it very interesting and very illuminating, and others see it as nothing but a waste of time and money. One thing also that Christo and Jean-Claude insisted on is that they don't get paid for their art. They're not charging Berlin $30 million. If you look at this work of art and think like, man, how much did that thing cost taxpayer money? Not a cent. They make their money by selling prints and photographs and also small works of art. You can see that wrapping things in fabric is a very common theme in their art. I think I've kind of rambled on a bit too much. It's just that I'm a huge fan. That's Christo a few years ago. Christo and Jean-Claude have done a number of projects over the years. In 2016, they installed the floating piers. These long walkways that you could walk across to get to these islands in the middle of the lake. There he is. Isn't he cute? He also had a project recently in London in 2018, installing this enormous floating work of art, only up for a few weeks and then taken down. As you can see, Christo was getting on in years. Jean-Claude had passed away, and he's made it his mission to kind of finish up their last projects. One of the projects that's still being realized is this enormous kind of pyramid structure that he wants to install in Abu Dhabi. There was also plans for a project here in the United States in 2015, but unfortunately that was canceled, basically due to the Trump administration. And there was going to be a big installation in September of this year, but as you might imagine, that was canceled. And to make things worse, Christo passed away this year. He passed away this summer, and I'm devastated because I had made plans to go to Paris and see this firsthand, and now I can't. Oh well, I guess that's life. Damn you, 2020, you've taken everything from us. Anyway, Shut up, Grix. What's on the test? Christo and Jean-Claude's running fence. Let me see, where am I on time? Oh yeah, I'm doing great. All right, let's take a look at something that's definitely going to be on the test. Oh, wait, I almost forgot about this one. All right, so the idea that art no longer has to have an owner. Art can be an experience. You don't have to go to a museum to see art. That's the case for Robert Smithson. This is an example of a type of art called earth art or earthworks. And you can probably guess why it's called that. It's art made out of, well, earth, natural materials, sticks and stones and rocks and dirt, snow, leaves. Artists who make art out of natural materials in the natural world, this is something that actually is still on display. So as you can see, this is in the Great Salt Lake of Utah, and Spiral Jetty was completed in 1970. It's this long spiral extending into the Great Salt Lake in a very desolate, very hard to reach, remote part of Utah. Again, the idea being that art doesn't have to have like an inner meaning to be interesting, and also the idea that art doesn't need to have an owner anymore. Anyone can go and see this, but you might want to check the weather before you go. Infamously, shortly after creating and completing this work of art, the water level in the Great Salt Lake rose and submerged Spiral Jetty completely from view. But it made an interesting return. This is what it looked like whenever it was underwater. In 2004, the water level in the Great Salt Lake receded far enough that for the first time in about 30 years, Spiral Jetty was visible. And all that time underwater had crystallized the sculpture, covered it with salt crystals. Isn't that remarkable? And if you want to, you can find lots of videos of people on YouTube and Instagram going to Great Salt Lake and photographing themselves walking along the Spiral Jetty. Again, this is the idea that art doesn't have to have an owner. Art isn't a commodity. Art isn't a painting hanging in a museum. It can be an experience for anyone to enjoy. So this is what it would look like to go see Spiral Jetty in person. And I have to admit, this is one of those places that's definitely on my bucket list. I would love to go to Utah and see the Spiral Jetty firsthand. Look at the way that the sand sparkles because of all the salt content in the Salt Lake. Really amazing work. But yeah, it's kind of similar to minimalism in that it's a simple shape with no real inner meaning, but clearly this work of art is still interesting, still something that perhaps you could have a very strong reaction to. Very 70s. All right, this is what I was getting at. This, ladies and gents, is one of the potential candidates for the short answer section. This is Judy Chicago's The Dinner Party. In terms of style, this is often categorized as feminist art. And that makes sense, as we'll see in a moment here. But it's also, in a way, sort of conceptual. All right, so what we're looking at here is a table, a triangular table. And the concept of the dinner party is that this is a table set up for honored guests, specifically women. All the famous women in the world who contributed to world history are honored here at this sort of take on a Last Supper scene. There are 13 panels, or 13 place settings on each one of these three wings, making 39 honored guests, with a uniquely designed place setting, including a table runner and plate. On the ground are names of 999 other women who made a contribution to history. This is a work of art that celebrates women. It celebrates women's achievements. The artist is Judy Chicago. And this is something else that you see a lot in the 70s. Artists taking on kind of an alternate persona. That's not her real name, just as Christo and Jean-Claude are not their real names. Here's some of the panels that you can see honoring women in history. The first panel is dedicated to Primordial Goddess, the last one to the female artist Georgia O'Keeffe. It's designed to be a very educational experience, and it's fascinating to look at the conceptual designs of these place settings. The piece is now in the Brooklyn Museum, and I highly recommend that you go here if you have a chance to make it to New York City, to see these panels, to read about these women, and see how their contributions are summed up artistically. It's a very interesting education on, say, Sacagawea, but also if you look at the way that it's designed, it's meant to honor her history as, say, a Native American. The colors are carefully chosen. The designs are carefully chosen. It's a very important work of art, honoring women who otherwise would be denied a seat at, well, the table. And I have turned this into a homework project. Do you think that maybe the dinner party should be a bit larger? Do you think that there's a woman who deserves to be honored at the dinner party? If you think so, maybe you could take it upon yourself to design a plate and table runner, a place setting for a woman whom you think deserves to be honored, like Michelle Obama or Malala Yousafzai. I've seen ones for Helen Keller or for Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Just a woman in history that you think deserves a seat at the table. Design a place setting for her. Explain your conceptual design and submit it to Blackboard as one of your homework projects. Again, it's a fascinating work of art, beautiful installation, and honestly, this is one of my top 10 favorite works of art that I've ever seen. It's visually interesting, it's conceptually interesting, it's educational, it's in this cool museum space, it's very otherworldly. I just love this piece, and yeah, hopefully you have a chance to see it yourself. But it is very much about concept. And that also tends to be the idea behind, frankly, one of my least favorite artists in the entire world, Joseph Beuys. This is a work of art that is classified as performance art. Performance art is a movement in art, but also you might say the medium. In the case of performance art, nothing is made. There is no art object. It's an artist making a performance, kind of like a play in a way, but it's usually kind of limited in scope. Normally, I'd take more time to explain it, but this involved a performance where Joseph Beuys lived with a wild coyote for a week, wrapped up in a tablecloth and with a weird shepherd's crook coming out of his hands. For an entire week, these two lived, ate, and slept together in an art gallery in a cage. You would come to this art gallery and see this man living with a wild coyote. It's a very strange sort of idea. Something that it's not really meant to be art in the sense that it's a painting. The art is the performance. It's the concept. Again, art in the 70s is very strange, and I would go more into it, but you guys have given me enough of your time. There are videos of Joseph Beuys' performance. I dare you to watch it. But in terms of what's going to be on the test, this is an example of a type of art called performance art. You can see that in the 70s, they're really redefining what art means and what it can mean, and whether or not you think it was successful, I suppose, is just a matter of taste. But thanks for sticking around. Thanks for giving me your time. I'll see you guys in class soon, and email me if you have any questions. Have a good one.